Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is the 1979 horror science fiction classic, Alien. Now, I actually reviewed this movie before a couple of years ago, but I took my old review of this movie down because I really felt like my old review of this movie really didn't do the film that much of a justice, so I decided to re-review the film. Now, I have Alien on the Alien Quadrilogy box set. Now, the film is directed by Ridley Scott, who before this directed a movie called The Duelist, and after this he would go on to direct movies like Blade Runner and Legend and Hannibal and Gladiator and American Gangster. Now, even though this wasn't Ridley Scott's first film, this was definitely the film that really did make Ridley Scott into what he is now. Now, the film is written by Bannon, who before this worked with John Carpenter on the movie Dark Star, which he wrote, and after this he would go on to write and direct the movie The Return of the Living Dead, and he also co-wrote the movie Total Recall. Now, basically what Bannon wanted to do with this movie was he wanted to essentially remake Dark Star, only as a horror film instead of a black comedy. Now, the film was originally going to be produced by Roger Corman. Like, the original script for this movie was much more of a B-movie kind of script. Like, the script was originally written, like, the movie was originally going to be very much a B-movie, but then producers Walter Hill and David Giler read the script and they actually did a few uncredited rewrites to the script, and really they're kind of the ones who are responsible for this movie really becoming as good as it actually is, because this was originally going to be a B-movie, but then when producers Walter Hill and David Giler got involved, it ended up becoming much more than just a B-movie. Now, I love Roger Corman and I love B-movies, but I'm really glad this movie didn't turn out to be a B-movie. I'm glad this movie turned out to be really an A-list movie that just happens to have a B-movie premise. Now, this film, it definitely draws a lot of inspiration from many of the B-movies that came out in the 1950s, but this movie, it definitely has a much bigger budget than a lot of those movies, and it also takes itself much more seriously than a lot of the B-movies from the 1950s, but the film, it definitely does draw inspiration from a lot of those movies. Now, Ridley Scott actually said that he drew a lot of inspiration from Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I actually have a poster of right behind me, but basically when Ridley Scott was directing this movie, he basically wanted to make this movie more or less like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, only in space. Now, the plot of Alien is it's set over 100 years in the future, and it follows the crew of this spaceship called the Nostromo. I think I'm saying the name of the ship right, and basically the ship, it's heading back to Earth, but then the ship's computer detects what appears to be a distress signal coming from this planet. So, the crew of this spaceship, they're told by the company who originally sent them out into space that they have to investigate this distress signal, which of course a lot of them are kind of pissed off about because they were all thinking they were going to go home, but now they have to investigate what appears to be a distress signal coming from this planet that they never heard of. So they land on this planet, and 3 of the crew members go out and and they find an alien spacecraft on this planet, and it appears that this spacecraft was not originally from this planet, but it crash-landed on the planet. So they go onto this alien spacecraft, and they find the body of a dead alien creature, and it appears that something burst out of its chest, and then one of the crew members, a man named Kane, played by John Hurt, goes down into what appears to be a cave and finds all these eggs, and one of the eggs opens up and this parasite comes out of it and latches itself onto his face. So they end up bringing Kane back onto the spaceship, and later on this parasite ends up falling off his face and dying, and it appears that Kane is alright, but it turns out that this parasite actually impregnated him with something, and that something ends up bursting out of his chest and ends up becoming an alien monster. And basically the plot of the movie from then on is the crew of this spaceship end up getting terrorized by this alien monster, which pretty much starts picking them off one by one. Now, the film of course stars John Hurt, who plays the character of Kane, and the film also stars Sigourney Weaver as the character of Ellen Ripley, who ends up being the main character of the movie, and this was actually Sigourney Weaver's first movie. Before this, she did a lot of Broadway plays, but I believe this was her first feature film. The film also stars Veronica Cartwright as a crew member named Lambert. Now, Veronica Cartwright was also in movies like The Birds and the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, the film also stars Tom Skerritt, who plays the character of Dallas, who is the captain of this ship. Now, Tom Skerritt, besides this movie, the other movie that I remember him best from was David Cronenberg's The Dead Zone. The film also stars Yaphet Kotto as Parker. It also stars Harry Dean Stanton as a character named Brett. The movie also stars Ian Holm as a character named Ash. Now, Ian Holm would go on to play Bilbo Baggins in the Lord of the Rings movies. Now, Alien is such a classic movie. It really is, and what really makes this movie work for me is the fact that it does have a B-movie premise, yet it takes itself much more seriously than a typical B-movie would. Like, the film, it's incredibly well made and incredibly well acted, and the acting and the characters in the movie really make the movie work for me, and it's a very artistically directed film. Like, Ridley Scott really does do a good job with directing this movie, and it's a very atmospheric movie as well, and Ridley Scott does a brilliant job at creating the atmosphere, and it really is a gothic horror film, only set in outer space, and it's also a very, very psychological movie, because when you think about it, they're alone in outer space. Like, they're literally trapped on this spaceship in the middle of space with nowhere to go, and there's an alien monster on the ship that is picking them all off one by one. So it really is a very psychological film when you stop to think about it, because it's not really the idea that it's an alien monster that's killing them all off. It's the whole idea that they're alone in the middle of space and they can't go anywhere. That's what really makes this movie so scary, in my opinion. Now, I actually consider Alien to very much be a body horror film. Now, for those of you who don't know what body horror is a subgenre of horror that deals with something horrible happening to the human body. Either the human body physically transforms or it's invaded by some kind of invading force, like a virus or a parasite or something. Like a lot of David Cronenberg's earlier movies were body horror films. And in my opinion, Alien is very much a body horror film, because when you think about it, John Hurt's character, Kane, he's literally impregnated with this baby alien. He's impregnated, which is something that's not supposed to happen to men, yet it happens to him. And I do consider something where something happens to the human body that is not supposed to happen, I very much do consider that to be body horror. Now, in the movie, there does seem to be a theme of technology taking over human life. Like, you realize that everything on this spaceship is pretty much being controlled by an artificial intelligent computer system called Mother, and without giving too much away, one of the crew members is actually a cyborg, but that's all I want to say about that. But there definitely does seem to be a theme in this movie of technology taking over human life. In the film, there's also kind of a theme of corporate corruption, because you realize that this company that sent them out into space, it turns out that they really want to get their hands on this alien, and it turns out that getting their hands on this alien creature is more important to this company than the lives of the crew. Now, the monster in this movie, the Xenomorph, is definitely one of the most legendary movie monsters of all time. Now, the Xenomorph was designed by artist H.R. Giger, and H.R. Giger also designed all the sets for the derelict alien spacecraft that you see in the movie, and his artwork is absolutely beautiful, and you have a lot of this, like, pseudo-sexual imagery in the movie, like when they find this alien spacecraft, the openings on the spacecraft essentially look like giant vaginas, pretty much, and the alien's head is supposed to look like a giant penis, like, so you have a lot of this, like, pseudo-sexual imagery in the movie. Now, one thing I really like about this movie is in the film, you get a lot of hints of a much larger mythos, but at the same time, a lot of it is kind of left open to the viewer's interpretation. Like, in the beginning of the movie, they find the dead body of that alien creature, which ended up getting called the space jockey, and I like how in this movie they never actually explain what the space jockey really is. Now, later on in the movie Prometheus, which was a prequel to this movie, they actually did explain what the space jockey was, but I liked how in this movie you really don't know what the space jockey really is, or where this derelict spacecraft really came from, and I liked that. And also in the movie, John Hurt's character finds all those eggs. Now, in the sequels, they introduce the character of the alien queen, but this of course was before they came up with the concept of the queen, so just looking at this as a standalone movie, in this movie, you don't know yet what actually laid those eggs, so if you wanted to, you could interpret whatever laid those eggs as something even more horrifying than the alien creature that you see in the movie. So yeah, Alien, it's a classic movie. It's a very thought-provoking science fiction film, as well as a very creepy psychological horror film. And it's one of those movies that even if you've never seen this movie, you definitely have heard of this movie. And if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you go check this movie out. Now, when this movie came out, it was a huge success, and it spawned countless different rip-offs and knockoffs, and it also spawned comic book spin-offs, and it also spawned a series of sequels. In 1986, you had the film Aliens. In 1992, you had Alien 3, and in 1997, you had the film Alien Resurrection, and then you had the Alien vs. Predator movies, and then you had the film Prometheus, which was a prequel to this movie. So yeah, that's my review on Alien, and bye.